Well, joining us now to discuss all of this is Congressmember Brad Sherman of the 32nd District. Congressmember Sherman, thanks so much for taking the time for being with us tonight. I know it's a difficult time for you and your district, and we appreciate you being here.
Thank you. My district includes the Palisades, Malibu, and so much of the other territory. This has been a tough time.
Well,
and I want to just take a moment to commend Spectrum. You guys have done an outstanding job of covering not only this event, but other events in our LA area.
Well, we appreciate that very much, Congressman Sherman, and we can just only imagine what it's like for you to have this connection to your constituents and to these people in this area, and to hear these stories. I understand you've, of course, had to come back from D.C. to address this and to be there on the ground. Let's just begin by talking about what you've been seeing and what you've been hearing from your constituents.
It's a tough time. So many people have been affected, and those who have not been burned down have been evacuated, and those who haven't been evacuated feel for so many others who, everybody's got a friend who's been evacuated.
Yeah, we feel that. We feel that, over the course of this night alone, we've been speaking to, in some cases, we've been speaking on the phone to partners, significant others, family members of people in our newsroom who are the closest eyes to these fires. Some of us are losing properties, and so we can relate to all of that, as I know you can as well. I guess we could begin by talking about the resources that are flowing through. Obviously, you're there as a Congress member, so we were hearing about FEMA doing a full matching, 100% match on the funds that California spends on this firefight. Talk about how that came about and what it means.
Well, President Biden, who was kind enough to call me just a few hours ago, has provided a disaster declaration and the firefighting grants at the full maximum level. And I'll be working with the White House to make sure that this covers all of the various fires. We've just had this Kenneth fire break out a few hours ago, and that it covers the Franklin fire, which was last month. So we want to hopefully cover this whole group of fires. But obviously the Palisades fire by itself is just enormous. It is the largest in terms of property damage fire, not in the history of America. In fact, it's bigger than the 10 largest other fires in the history of America. And while it's the local government is right there on the front line in terms of fighting these fires, it will be the federal government there with the money for rebuilding, both for physical infrastructure, governmental infrastructure, and also providing assistance and both grants and loans to businesses and individuals who have uninsured damage.
All that's so important, these federal funds that you discuss, because as you say, the damage here is somewhat unprecedented. I mean, we know that 2018, the Camp Fire is roughly $30 billion of damage. And at estimates right now, J.P. Morgan is saying $50 billion. So some of this is about businesses, as you mentioned, the SBA, and some of this is about individuals and property. And at that news conference and briefing that President Biden had earlier, he discussed, and VP Harris discussed, what we know in the state with insurance and the fact that so many folks have had their insurance policies canceled for one reason or another. Hearing VP Harris as a Californian speak to that in this federal context was interesting. What do you think about what we're facing here on an insurance level from a federal standpoint?
Well, the vice president and her husband are constituents of mine living in Brentwood, which is just one community over from the Palisades fire. They fully understand the situation. And I guess it's not a coincidence. The insurance companies raised their rates or even discontinued people that lived in fire-prone areas. And guess what? The people who are losing their homes are living in fire-prone areas. So many of them have had to turn to this state fair share fund, which tends to underinsure. And a lot of people who have some sort of insurance may cost them $1 million to build back their home, and they may have $500,000 of coverage. Those who have private insurance and have fully sufficient private insurance, we've got to make sure that the insurance companies write the checks. And we've got to make sure that some scammers are not involved in offering to rebuild homes and then not doing it. So we've got a long way to go. This is the biggest fire in the history of America, and it's going to be the biggest rebuilding post-fire in the history of America.
Sherman, if we could just speak a bit more about some of the funds that might be available. We talk about FEMA, and we talk about the SBA, which might be stepping into the fold as well. And FEMA will be doing a 100% match on the state's outlay of resources to fight the fires. But there's also FEMA funds available for individuals who need help with funds and transport. Yeah, and please continue with some of those resources.
FEMA is very generous with government, with local and state government, with paying for the cost of firefighters, paying for the cost of rebuilding governmental structures. It's not that generous when it comes to individuals. The grants, the uninsured costs tend to go up to, I think it's $43,600, which sounds generous if you're from Wichita, but doesn't sound generous if you live in the Pacific Palisades or Malibu.
Yeah, that's true. Disasters.assist.gov is a website that people can go to understand a bit about what's available for them for FEMA, and we encourage folks to do that. But as you say, it's one of the things to consider. Also, business interruption funds might be coming from the SBA. Is that correct?
That's correct. And again, the amounts involved are going to be smaller than one would expect, given the costs of doing business on the west side of Los Angeles.
Yeah. So one of the questions that President Biden received at that briefing today from one of the reporters, because when we talk about this FEMA match that's available, it's available 100% for 180 days. But as you and I and everyone at home also knows, in 9 days it's a new administration. The new administration is coming in with President-elect Trump. He's spoken quite adversarially towards our governor and towards some of the management of these fires, and there's been some implied and explicit threats along the way. So the question to President Biden was, thank you for these funds for California. Do you think the incoming administration will honor many of the grants and express and implied promises that you've made for California? He said, I hope so. What's your sense on that, and what message would you like to send?
Well, I mean, if you listen to Trump's statement back in October, you'd think that he's hell-bent on not providing to California the aid that the law requires go to California when there's been an official disaster declaration. It was difficult for him back in his first term. He didn't want to provide aid to Orange County, where we had some disasters, and then was only persuaded to do so when they showed him how the particular precincts in Orange County that were affected happened to vote for him. I don't want to go precinct by precinct in terms of the those who lost their homes in these fires. Many of those precincts in the Palisades did not vote for Donald Trump. But you know, what can I say? The Palisades is not Orange County. So hopefully we will establish the right of to get the disaster relief that is called for and triggered by the disaster delegation. And hopefully President Trump, who, you know, says many things at his rallies, hopefully we don't have to take him seriously. Hopefully he'll do his job. Now, he'll want to somehow come up with excuses why California's fault. I don't think President Trump is going to try to tell us, well, if he had been in the White House, the winds would not have dared to blow with such ferocity. He may say that the water management in the state, there's plenty of water here in Los Angeles. Nobody's going on Spectrum and saying, don't take a shower tonight. It's difficult to get the water into the Palisades in the quantity that's needed by a fire that is absolutely unprecedented in scale. And what you need is not just water, but water pressure, even at higher elevations. To do this, to provide the pressure, there are 3 million-gallon tanks that ultimately were exhausted. These are not tanks to provide water, but tanks to provide water pressure. And then they'll try to say that relates to the fire department. No, it's the Department of Water and Power that provides the water pressure and even maintains, make sure that it gets to the hydrants. They'll say, if Trump is looking for excuses, he'll try to find them and he'll try to make them as politically as possible. I don't want to make politics about Trump didn't care about global warming, that these problems occurred. This is not a time for politics from either the left or the right. This is not because of the fire chief happens to be a member of the LGBT community. It's not because directly traceable to particular decisions made on global warming. This is a disaster, and we need to deal with it without the hot button issues.
Well, Congressman Sherman, we certainly echo the sentiment that this should be beyond politics, especially in this moment, and we all share the hope that these funds come to California forthwith, not just for the 9 days, but beyond as well. Congressman Brad Sherman, 32nd Congressional District, thank you so much for taking the time, and we're sending our best to you and to all those in your district who are experiencing the worst of the Palisades fire.
And thank you for your in-depth coverage.
We appreciate that very much. Thank you so much, Congressman Brad Sherman.